Hello and welcome to News Desk. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Pablo Folilias.
Across much of the democratic world, politics feels stuck. Governments hesitate, voters are fed up, and the big problems don't seem to get fixed. So what happens when countries stop waiting for the perfect moment and just get on with it? Well, this week we're looking at ideas that work when politics feels broken.
And to help us unpack that, we have a great guest with us. John Kampfner is an author and journalist and an authority on global affairs and politics. He's been looking at not just the problems the world is facing, but some of the solutions that are already out there.
Yeah, and John, we want to look at some of those solutions in a moment. But first of all, just explain to us why you decided to dig deep on this particular subject and in the end write a book.
Hi there, Alex. Hi there, Pablo. Yeah, I mean, it's quite simple. I have been for quite some time now a professional pessimist. I always expected the worst, predicted the worst, and I was almost always right. I predicted Brexit for the UK in 2016, the victory of Donald Trump in 2016. I even predicted that Marine Le Pen would win in France the following year. I got that one wrong. And, I predicted Trump the time after. And I said to myself, look, it's great. You get yourself lots of free gifts and bottles of wine and bets that you win, but it doesn't actually help with any of the problems. So it's time to shed that pessimism, shed that gloom, and in a very practical but radical way, start going in search of solutions, which is what I did for the last 2 or 3 years, looking at 10 countries and cities that did one thing well that we should all copy.
Great, and looking forward to hear more about that in a moment.
Me too. This is going to be a very interesting discussion, I feel. But before we actually get on to today's discussion, let's bring in, of course, the great Cherry Chan, who has a poll question for us this week.
Yeah, today we are asking, what dominates politics too much right now? There are 4 options: culture wars, crisis management, leaders and theatrics, or quick fixes. Someone already in the chat said that we should put money as one of the options.
Which is true. We can only put 4.
Yeah, we can only put 4. So among these 4, let us know which one you think dominates politics too much, and we will talk about the result later in the stream.
Of course.
Great, thanks very much.
And send us in your comments, of
course.
course.
Yes, please do send us in your comments and your questions, particularly to John Kampfner, so that we can put those to him here in the studio. Before we do move on, let's just have a bit of a rain check of where we are at this moment in time. And I guess the place that everyone keeps coming back to at the moment is the United States of America, because everything that's happening there seems to affect everywhere else in the world. When you look at the past year under Donald Trump, how do you view it, particularly from a domestic viewpoint?
The 2 things I've concluded that you should never say. One is he couldn't do that, and the other is it couldn't happen here. Trump has become the lodestar for the way politics is done in so many countries in the world. I say that as a tragedy, as an absolute disaster for governance, but it is what it is. And it's very much my view that the old ways of what we would call mainstream politics, what we have here in Germany, what you have in UK, France, in so many countries in the world, in Australia, in Canada. Anyway, you can name all the countries where there's a broad spectrum of centre-right to centre-left. And the divisions were strongly held, but they were still fairly narrow compared to what they are now. That's all over. That is absolutely all over. And it's really incumbent on all of us who believe in liberal democracy to come up with something quite different.
I want to talk about liberal democracy later. I keep saying everything's later, but it is important that we do talk about that. Just sticking with the US then, we've all been watching scenes that have been coming out of Minneapolis over the last few weeks, and we do have some pictures that we can show you where we have seen federal agents going to extremes to remove undocumented migrants, and unfortunately, as we all know, that has resulted in the deaths of 2 US citizens just this month. What do you make of what has been going on there? And have we seen the Trump administration trying to distance itself a little bit from that?
I think the operative term you've just used, Alex, is a little bit. I'm not remotely optimistic that we're seeing some sort of sea change. The whole purpose of the Trump administration is to disrupt. It absolutely loves having enemies, and it loves to fight its enemies and to devour its enemies. It has real enemies and it invents enemies. And this whole question of the dispatching of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, with their far-right training, with their sort of shoot first, ask questions, second approach, it's designed to foment civil unrest. And if you were being a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not sure what I think on this, you would say it's being done deliberately so that Trump might even suspend the midterm elections, which he seems set to have a setback on, and even the presidentials next time around. Don't rule anything out with Donald Trump. And I see this as being far more than just him trying to crack down on irregular migration.
Is there any going back on that? If Donald Trump passes the baton on and it's another Republican leader, or even a Democrat, is there any going back?
Well, it depends what you mean by going back. There's a totally separate question, which is about transatlanticism, America's relationship with Europe and stuff. There's no going back on that. America is no longer going to be the sort of the nursemaid to Europe, the country that is all very benign and that's all gone. And you might say about time too. It's not just Trump, Barack Obama. They've all been telling Europe to step up for a long time. In terms of how much or if the United States can recover some sort of sense of tolerance, mojo, in terms of being a country where, yeah, there are people of very different points of view. The Civil War is still very much sort of a sense, and then you had the race riots in the 1960s and the 70s. America has always been a divided country, but never like this. And yeah, whatever happens with Trump, and he's not young, and lots of people wonder about his mental health and his state of mind. But I think he has Trump-proofed the MAGA continuum, whether it's J.D. Vance or somebody else. It may not be as sort of impulsive and as crazy as it is now, but the idea that, in my view, what is a far-right movement in America is just going to pack up its bags and go home, it's not going to happen.
I just want to jump in there because, of course, the Trump administration can say and try and do what they want, right? But there are pretty strong institutions in the States in place. Okay.
No. That, I think, is, to me, the incredible lesson. As I say, sitting here in Berlin, thinking about the 1920s and the 1930s, we all thought, look at these checks and balances. The judiciary, it's strong. Parliament, through Congress and the two houses of Congress, yeah, they're going to be a brake on the arbitrary use of power, the accumulation of power. As for business, that's the force of common sense, and they're also going to be a brake. None of this has happened. And you know, you look at the tech bros who were all sort of DEI and diversity and inclusion 5 minutes ago. As soon as Donald Trump comes in, they're all ultra-libertarianism, and no crackdown and is too bad for them. Business goes where the money goes, I'm afraid. Politicians are largely cowed and frightened. TV stations, the big American networks, are frightened stiff. It's amazingly easy, we now realize, which is just a return of history, to do what Trump is doing.
Let's broaden it out a little bit. Last week, we had the World Economic Forum, and Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney gave a speech which has certainly got a lot of attention and has heartened some people, or perhaps woken much of Europe up indeed, as well as obviously Canada and other countries. He said that the world isn't in transition, but it's in the middle of a rupture. Let's have a listen to him.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
So Mark Carney there, is he right in saying that the world is not in transition, but what we're witnessing is a rupture?
If they haven't already, it seems to be that so much of the democratic world's fallen in love with Mark Carney. Yeah. It's been regarded as the great speech, you know, not quite Martin Luther King, but you know, getting there. And it was before, as you said, the World Economic Forum, the great and the good of the finance world. The actual speech itself was quite economic and quite dry in places, and that's what, in some ways, is what made it so powerful. It's what his audience was. It was saying, you guys, if you think you can navigate your way through this in a sort of clever, neat way, forget it. What we're going through is incredibly turbulent, and we all need to understand that and behave very differently from now, which is the conclusion I drew when beginning, you know, when that's how the research took me down that route. You still feel that some people think that, oh, you know, we've hit peak Trump, it's all going to dissipate, and then we're going to go back to a world of rationalism and calmness and everything else. I just don't see it happening.
So what do you think is actually broken then?
I mean, from a Western perspective, and there are many people with other perspectives, and I have to, you know, always sort of say, you must remember, you know, being a Brit living in Germany, now a German, you know, I have a particular worldview that isn't necessarily one shared by others. I have had the great fortune, as have people 20 years older than me and everybody since me, to live through a period of unprecedented calm. And until the financial crisis of 2007-8, unprecedented growth as well. And it'll be for historians to ask themselves, when did this all end? Was it 9/11? Was it the Iraq War? Was it the financial crash? Was it Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Was it the arrival of Trump 1 or Trump 2? You know, it was probably all of those, and it was those were different routes, you know, markers on the route map. And, you know, any political and economic system that lasts 80 years is pretty good. So it's not like, oh, my God, what's happened? And in a way, to work out, we know what the alternative is. It's kind of Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping. They're all different, but they're all drawn from a similar mindset, authoritarianism, along with sort of MBS in Saudi and Erdogan in Turkey. It's, you know, it's Trump's strongmen who he respects, and from a particular point of view, you can understand why. That is one side of the pole. What is on the other side at the moment just seems a soggy mess of leaders struggling to work out what it is they want. And that's a challenge, to work out what it is that we can build as an antidote to authoritarianism.
I was going to actually ask, with regards to that, you said a soggy mess. So you're saying essentially that the other leaders, say here in Europe, European leaders, what path then should they kind of take if they're trying to figure it out? Is it sort of that Europe needs a kind of a series of stronger leaders, or a stronger voice, a united voice?
The term I use, Pablo, in my book is courage. Now, that's a bit sort of motherhood and apple pie-ish, you know, it's kind of like, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? What do I mean by that? What I don't mean is kind of Trumpian shouting and screaming extremism. But there is a political courage to say, you could take Keir Starmer in the UK, you could take Emmanuel Macron in France, you could take Friedrich Merz here. They all have different circumstances around them. I think the most culpable of all of them actually is Starmer, who only a year and a half ago walked into 10 Downing Street in London with a massive parliamentary majority of 150. He could have walked on water. He could have done what he wanted. And instead, from day one, he looked over his shoulder and he said, oh, my God, what are the opinion polls saying? Oh, what is this newspaper saying? Oh, dear, what's this person tweeted? Oh, dear, this, oh, dear, that. and from a position of enormous strength, showed incredible weakness and incrementalism. Friedrich Merz here in Germany is a very different set of political circumstances because, as you know, built into Germany's post-war constitution and wider than constitution mindset was the idea that everything is based on coalitions, compromise and consensus. In other words, nobody should go too far down one route. And that worked incredibly well. Everybody thought that was great. And at some point, until they didn't. And, the idea that you have two or sometimes even three parties, you come together, you say A wants this, B wants that, so let's settle on C, is now regarded as a weakness. And so the system that's in Germany now makes it harder to be decisive. So what you've got to do is know what you want to do, level with voters and say, guys, we've got to raise taxes, if that's what you decide to do, because we've got to do this. We've got to clamp down on immigration because of the following reasons. Or we've actually got to let in more people because our economy needs it for the following way. We've got to change the way our health system works because it's no longer affordable. We've got to change the way our pensions work because we have too many old people and not enough young people to pay the money and to pay for social services. Whatever it is, you've got to be honest. Now, the counter-argument to that is, yeah, but that's a way to electoral annihilation. And in some ways, I understand that. On the other hand, I just think that, in a way, this kind of politics of weakness and of trying to slip things in without people noticing, I think that's been rumbled now. Yeah. And people respect honesty, even if they disagree with that particular point that person's making.
So I want to unpack some of the things that you just said, such as immigration, health, etc. But before we move on to that, you're talking about, in your book, the states that are adjusting, the countries that are adjusting quicker. What about the countries that are not adjusting quickly and are still in denial?
You mean Europe? Or at least parts of Europe, and not just. I mean, my choice of 10 countries was deliberately designed to surprise as well. I mean, if you just wanted to go for countries that are sort of top of all the league tables for this and that, all you do is you have the Nordics, with mentions for Switzerland, the Netherlands, maybe a bit of Singapore, maybe a bit of South Korea, and and the job is done. And the job is done because that's always that. And I think life is much more interesting and complicated than that. You have countries all over the world, whether it's in sub-Saharan Africa or in Latin America, that are struggling with poor governance or with drug cartels or with different problems. My job was not really to focus on that, but to say to all of us, and us is whoever, it's any viewer. It's saying, look, here are some countries. Some of them are surprising. Some of them you will disagree with and you will propose, which is something I very much want people to do, come up with your own thoughts, your own ideas of other countries that I could have included and why. But what I'm trying to do is to say there is no such thing as, well, what we've got is great. Yeah. There is no country on earth that cannot learn from the good practice of somebody else. And if we did, our public services, our compact between voters and governments would be improved. I mean, none of my 10 are sort of perfect beacons. None of them have, are sort of like, oh my God, that's perfect. Let's just cut and paste that and insert it into ours and everything will be fine. That's not the way of the world. But, I praise them because they're seriously trying to grapple with stuff.
And let's talk about some of those. But are there any good comments in
there? Yeah, there's some comments
chat?
coming in for sure. Well, there's one comment here from one of our regular viewers, Devos, who's responding to the poll saying that Trump dominates politics. He's definitely the biggest problem. Any projections, is a question to you, any projections for the upcoming US midterm elections? But you've said that they may not even happen. That will affect everybody's lives. And one here, which is from Carolina Vilena, which says unity among factions, whether right wing or left wing, is the key to repair politics that has been broken for so long.
That's a very good point. I would say on that point, which I think is really smart, some of these big problems, whether it's climate, which I'm sure we'll talk about, whether it's demographics and aging, those two I think are the two biggest problems that we face. They're generational. They're multi-generational problems. They're not problems that correspond to a 4 or 5 year electoral cycle. So to that point of the viewer, it's absolutely right. You've got to have a sense of cross-party, commissions. The Brits call them royal commissions, in other countries, parliamentary commissions and whatever, in which you say, let's all not necessarily agree on every fine detail, but let's agree on the guardrails of what it is we're trying to do, and that what it is that we're reforming is not going to be undone by the next government.
And this is exactly what they do in Denmark, somewhere where I lived for a few years, where they do have these kind of long-term contracts which most of the political parties sign up to, and they agree for the next 5 or 10 years, whether it's defence or something economic, we will not go back on this. This is what we're sticking to. And somehow, I mean, it's a small country, obviously, only 5 million or so maybe it's easier, but that has always been part of how that country
I don't buy the... those people said, oh, well, a few of my countries are small countries. Oh, no, it only works in a small country. I mean, Singapore, which isn't actually one of my models, but actually 10 years or so ago, I wrote a book about the Singapore model, which is a similar but different point. People said, yeah, but it's easy. In a city-state, it's easy to do that kind of thing. Well, actually, there's a lot of stuff such as in this book I've written about the digital revolution that Estonia has gone through, that is completely transferable to huge countries. In fact, what Estonia has done is what India is doing. So we've gone from 1.3 million to 1.4 billion.
Yes.
And these things are transferable. So I think more power to Denmark.
Well, let's pick up then on India, as you mention it first, because that is one of the countries, as you say, that's in your book. And on that particular issue, it seems to be a strategy over digital payments and how to ensure that everyone has access to money and to cash. Just explain why you picked that country, as you say, 1.4 billion people, because it's not necessarily one that somebody would have thought of maybe when you're looking at your top 10. Absolutely,
and I did that deliberately for that reason, and I was pleased I did so. I mean, digital is a major factor in this book.
We're looking at some pictures just there, by the way, of
that's
the,
right,
the kind of thing you're talking about.
QR code. And so in India, whether you're a rickshaw driver charging the equivalent of 10 cents of a euro or 10 cents of a dollar for a journey, whether you're a street vendor, whatever you may be, everybody pays by mobile, by QR code. And I'm not being some sort of digital utopian of the 1990s saying it's great in and of itself. What it's done is really just to give people a sense of control over their own money. Their money is safe. I did a lot of work in agricultural areas in Karnataka near the great tech city of Bengaluru, and in Haryana near the capital, Delhi. And you have farmers who previously were completely in hock to the middleman, whether it was for buying fertilizers or equipment. They would charge what they like and the farmers would have to stump up. They would then have their crops, and when their crops were going to the market to be sold, the middleman would basically take it off them and then inflate the price 5 times and take a huge profit. Now you look on your app, you work out this market is giving me this for this crop, it's giving me that for this crop. You book your transportation, some truck that will bring your crops from your field or your farm to your home farm to your market. You can buy equipment with bank credit because everybody now has a financial footprint. And I'm talking, and some of these apps are also for people who can't even read and write. and stuff that you can do just verbally. There's just an amazing sense. Again, I'm not trying to be utopian. There's problems around surveillance, and everything you have now has a footprint, which is a negative thing as well as a positive thing as well. But in a country that had so much poverty, but also so many people who are accumulating wealth and are joining the ranks of the middle classes all the time. You also have a convenience economy. You can press a button and anything will arrive at your doorstep, within a few seconds as well. And I remember talking to one guy who's a sort of a fintech guy in Delhi, and I said to him a little bit sort of cheekily, after half an hour of sitting down with him, I said, "Do you mind if I could look at your wallet?" And he said, "Well, yeah, right." So he got out his wallet and lots of cards and no rupees, no Indian money at all. And he said, "I don't need that. I just pay everything on my phone. Just, here you go. I pay it." And I said, "Yeah, but you've got 150 euros. He said, "Yeah, that's because I'm going to Germany next week." I mean, Germany, the cash country,
yeah,
cash country.
Which is one of my great, I'm sure it applies to many people, things that frustrate me.
Yeah.
For a start, it's a tax dodge. Secondly, it's there at the convenience of the producer rather than the consumer. It's just annoying in every which way. It's not remotely sort of democratic or it's all nonsense and old-fashioned. And I just think that there's so much. I mean, Kenya was one of the first countries, M-Pesa, to have maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago to have digital payments. Brazil's got a great payment system. Other Asian countries, African countries. Sometimes, not always, sometimes you just get a sense that Europe is falling behind.
Yeah.
But why is there such resistance? I mean, so I don't want to stick too long on the German issue, but I'm genuinely interested. Why do you think there is such resistance here in Germany, for example, to cashless payments?
No, I think, well, the reason cited, the high-minded reason cited, is data protection, country that suffered under the Nazis, and then part of the country then suffered under the East German communists, and the Stasi doesn't like the idea of giving any information to government, but people give information quite happily to Google or to MasterCard or to their local supermarket. It's a bogus excuse. I just think it's laziness. I think it's also just generational. I don't know many young people who think like that as well. And I mean, it is a problem. I love this country, and I'm very.
You wrote a book.
And I wrote a book, Why the Germans Do It Better. And I do think on so many areas they think harder about the world. There's no complacency here when it comes to their place in the world and what to do with stuff. And by the way, I think Friedrich Merz is doing, in the circumstances, not a bad job, a better job than he's given credit for by most German commentators and by the opinion polls. But there is an issue, and in some ways, if you're not sitting in Europe, you would think, well, great. I mean, what you're having is the advent of a multipolar world in which the people who thought themselves as strong and as wealthy are being taught a lesson by others, which is great.
If you are just joining us, this is News Desk, and we are discussing ideas that work when politics feels broken. And with us here, we have John Kampfner, who is a journalist and an author, and he is here talking about his new book, which is called Brave New World. It isn't out yet, will be coming out in April and then at other stages in the year. And we will be looking at a picture of that a little bit later. But we're just discussing some of the countries that John has chosen that seem to be doing some parts of life better than others. One of the big issues that is dominating much of politics globally, but particularly in Europe, in the US, and others, is migration and immigration. It's a tough political subject that obviously has encouraged a lot of parties on the right and the far right to really say it's time to clamp down, and has left a number of governments not quite sure what to do. Where in the world do you think is getting it doing it better over this issue, is getting it perhaps right over this issue? Who could we be learning from?
So the short answer to that question is Canada. And I'll come to, but if I can just set the scene before that, Alex, to say that migration, what you think about migration depends a little bit where you're sitting and what your perspectives are. But it is an issue that affects many, many countries. I mean, I was in South Africa not so long ago, and the flow of people from Zimbabwe over the border into South Africa, escaping much greater economic hardship and a lot of political repression, is putting enormous strain on community relations, particularly in towns closer to that border. I say that just by way of illustration, and you can replicate that in parts of other parts of Africa, in Latin America. So it's not just a problem for wealthy countries. The huge exodus of Palestinians, both long predating, although I'm sure it will continue when the borders open, the recent events in Jordan and in Beirut in Lebanon have been huge. I mean, the vast majority of migrants is a point that Europeans and inhabitants of wealthy countries don't realise. They are migrants either within their countries or neighbouring countries, many of which are also poor. I mean, Turkey has taken in so many Syrians and Afghans and Iraqis and others, far more than Germany, UK and France has done. So that's that point. Now, how do you deal with it? I mean, there's one way of saying it, which is the pure economic argument that wealthy countries, and it's linked to the point we've just begun to discuss about demographics and ageing populations. The economics are pointing in one direction. The politics are pointing in another. In so many sectors, you need migrants to do the work. Social care is one of them. Construction is another one. Short-term farming is another one. And certain aspects of retail and hospitality is another one. That's for a multitude of reasons. It's aging. It's also the number of people, and Merz here in Germany has been railing against it only in the last few days, and it's the same in other countries, who have signed off sick and who are sort of permanently outside the workforce. And you have an aging population, the baby boomers just about to hit retirement age, and you've got a demographic time bomb. Now, can some of that be offset by artificial intelligence? Well, time will tell on that, and I don't think it will be that simple, because I think many of the jobs that AI is about to take, it may create some also, are not necessarily the jobs I've just been talking about. You're not going to have AI construction workers. Well, maybe you are, robots and things, but it'd be quite harder. So that's a long-winded way of saying this is an incredibly combustible argument. If you say to people whose housing is being threatened, or they think it's being threatened, or who think that their access to healthcare is being threatened, or that their hourly wages, their salary is being threatened by people who are being undercut, who are undercutting them unwittingly, perhaps through unscrupulous employers, it's hard to make that argument. It's a sort of think tank type of argument. So what have you got to do? You've got to coin a phrase, take control. You really do need, there is no upside in any country for having an immigration system where you just don't know what's going on. Well, open borders is one thing if you have the European Union and you can have internal transfers and everybody know what's going on. I mean, I do not understand why the Brits have got such a hang-up about ID cards. In one fell swoop, Keir Starmer was toying with it, and as is his custom, he then was scared of it and has fought shy of that. I mean, the Brits have no idea who's in the country. The ability to process people, the ability to find people who have been declared no longer eligible to stay, you can just go and disappear in the UK very easily. You can get jobs, even though the government's trying to clamp down on the black market very easily. So you need to have a sense of control. That's the bottom line. Alongside that, you need to have community buy-in. And in Canada, they've been having a mature conversation about what it is to grow the economy. These are the sectors we need. They have a thing called the level, which is every 5 years they set annual levels of how many people whether it's family reunions, whether it's employment, whether it's other forms of reasons, refugees for political reasons coming into the country, that they agree. And they literally go to that level. The problem in recent years, up to a year ago, when Mark Carney, who we saw on the video, took over from Justin Trudeau, who was the outgoing Prime Minister, is that Trudeau raised the level hugely without really consulting anybody. And that bond of trust wasn't broken, but it was severely damaged by that action, because people thought, hey, we didn't agree to this. We weren't consulted on this. Our housing costs in the main
like in
cities,
Toronto, they're through the roof, aren't they?
Through the roof. The Greater Toronto area and the Greater Vancouver area, absolutely through the roof, because they had this idea of, we can spread people all around to rural Saskatchewan, rural Alberta, Newfoundland, etc. But that's not the way it works, because migrants or anybody come to a country, they go where their community is, or where they know people or family or whatever. That's just a human impulse to do that. So that doesn't work. But what is really amazing about Canada is they have this idea of sponsorship. So you could be a church group, you could be a family, you could be a company, you could be a community group, and you can sponsor somebody in a particular country. You might know them or you might not know them, and you go through agencies, and you bring them in, you school them in their interview for their application to come into the country. You then help them, with their plane journey. You meet them at the airport. You found them an apartment. You filled their fridge for the first week. You take them to the bank to sign up. You take them to the local school where you've already enrolled their kids, to the local health centre. I mean, it's amazing to see. And you've got a vested interest in the development of this person or this couple or this family over time. And it sort of embeds it. And then one thing, it's like a sort of, and one thing leads to another, and the next group helps the other. Again, there are problems. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah.
But it's that idea of, we're all in this together. I mean, it's interesting when you look at opinion polls and surveys of what people think of migrants. They always say, we're against immigration. It's a terrible thing, etc. But I like that man, my newsagent. I think my surgeon in the hospital, originally from Nigeria, was wonderful. I think the person in, my local, pharmacy, or the very nice person, whatever. Everybody, when they feel a personal stake, they have a very different view to a subject that's in abstract. But so many countries and so many governments are scared of having what I call a mature conversation about, it's not just saying, it's all wonderful, guys. Yeah. It's saying, okay, this is it. This is what we need. These are the things that are happening in the world. What do you suggest we do?
I want to bring in one of my two home countries, of course, Spain, which is very different to pretty much every country in the European Union when it comes to policy at the moment with regards to immigration. I mean, they've just agreed now that they will legalise 500 undocumented migrants to the country, 500,000, sorry. That's not the first time Spain has done that. In fact, that was done, I think, about 20 years ago as well. The policy has been much more open than many other countries in the European Union with regards to migration. And it's interesting listening to you, because it sounds like what the government have tried to do is explain to the population. Now, Spain, as you know, is a very divided country, sharply divided society for many reasons. But I do think this government, what they've tried to do is explain to people, look, this is why we need immigration to our country. Now, whether you agree with it or not, the reality is that if we want our economy to grow, we need people to come in. And we need to legalise people who are already in the country. So let's not ignore something that is happening. That's sort of the mentality of this government and people who would think like this government. What's your take on that? From a leadership perspective within the context of the European Union, but of course, because you have to also sign up to the agreements within Europe with regards to migration, and how bold a move, or not, maybe you don't think it is, from, say, Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, compared to, say, the policies in France or in Germany?
You make such a good point. I mean, Pedro Sanchez is a fascinating person. He's, according to the polls, he's not popular at all. And you do scratch your head and you think, you know, we've really gone mad. If somebody like him, who's doing, it's not, well, I've got a couple of points on migration, but before I come to that, the health service in Spain is really good.
Yeah.
It's a national health service, like Britain's, but it's run far better with far more regional autonomy.
It's regional autonomy.
And that gives much more of a sense of buy-in. It's much less bureaucratic. It's much more responsive. Again, it's got faults, but you know, it's
respected though, highly respected.
And it's respected, and people have that sort of sense of buy-in and of wanting to be involved. So it's good. It's good on its health service, its migration, and it's got a really strong economy at the moment. And yet he's so unpopular. There's one area of Sanchez I deeply disagree with, and that is his refusal to increase defence spending beyond the bare minimum, basically saying, you know, Ukraine, what's that got to do with us, type thing. And of course there is a huge, you know, it's a long way, Spain, from where we are in Berlin, 1 hour from the Polish border. You know, that bit I disagree with him. On immigration, there's one aspect, and you may know this better than me, Pablo, there's one area which makes immigration easier in Spain. The vast majority of migrants are from Latin America. They sound the same, and they look the same.
So there's no linguistic issue there.
But also physically they look the same.
I mean, the religion is the same. I mean, there's cultural definitely similarities. But I mean, the idea though as well is that it's not just, for example, you were mentioning before that it would be, you know, a lot of countries it's to fill issues with, say, I don't know, the social services, for example, or construction. I mean, what I find quite interesting in the Spanish context, and I think it's the same in Canada, is that immigration is meant to be across the board. There are issues within the health service, which a lot of countries in Europe have serious deficiencies in, so they need to bring people in. And the idea is, look, if we bring people in who are qualified, basically a cross-section of society, that's the idea in Spain.
But the only caveat is the point I made, which is to somebody who's just said, who's that family that's just moved in down the street, it's a natural human instinct. You can call it racism, you can call it what you like, but it is a natural human instinct when first confronted with the other, the new person who has arrived. Do they look like me? Do they sound like me? Maybe they have the same religion and whatever else. So it does make it easier.
Yeah, culturally it's definitely easier. In some aspects, in some of the immigration.
But it's still, I do really respect the fact that what Pedro Sanchez is doing is saying, this is what I believe in. This is the direction I would like my country to go in. I'll stand or fall on that.
So there's no U-turn.
I mean, he may have made some tactical U-turns on things here and there.
I'm comparing him to Keir Starmer in the UK.
Keir Starmer, a bit like every day you wake up and you think, what crazy thing has Donald Trump done? That you also think, what U-turn has Keir Starmer made?
Also, I should mention this, because I think it's quite an important point. I think a lot of people don't know this, is the reliance that the Spanish economy has, for example, on the US is less than a lot of other countries in Europe. So that also gives him a certain element of power, we'll say, to make sort of bolder decisions. But
I want to move on from...
Becoming a special on Spain.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
I want to move on from this,
that.
but I just want to say, because Nile Chaturvedi, lots of you are in the chat putting in some very good comments, and I love, I think it was DeVos who just said, we just need to be here to get the world right. Was that right? Or we can sort it all out.
Yeah,
sort the world out. I
he
like
said
that.
Like, he likes that, how we try to fix the world in a DW chat.
There's one actually from Lille who says, isn't it true that at no point in history so many people have had who have access to clean water and food, societal security and safety and prosperity? We have seen immense global prosperity over the past 80 years. Why the gloom?
Yes. And that's a very, very good point. And I did indirectly make that point by saying it depends where you are sitting from. If you are sitting in Europe and everything is, you know, pretty much every European society. I just came back from Poland last week on just a reporting assignment for a few days. It's a completely 50-50 society. Germany is a bit more fragmented. France is a 50-50 society. The UK...
What do you mean by 50-50?
Literally, you have 50%, roughly speaking, who subscribe to broadly liberal democratic values, multiculturalism, sort of tolerance, pro-LGBTQ, I'm just generalizing, but a sort of what Trump would call woke idea of a liberal society. And you have the other half of the population that feels very angry about the way society has developed in the last 10 or 20 years. They feel that the other point of view has been disenfranchised and it's time to strike back. Those are the Trump supporters. They're the supporters of Marine Le Pen in France, of Nawrocki in Poland, of Fico in Slovakia, or of Orban in Hungary, of Giorgia Meloni, although she's quite interesting, the way she has developed in Italy. And so, yes, so to the point of human development is absolutely. And this is a real challenge also, which is why I've introduced a couple of countries that are not purely sort of liberal democracies. One we just mentioned, which is India, which is notionally a democracy, but it's, you know, Narendra Modi is not everybody's idea of a touchy-feely, cuddly democrat, but also Morocco, which is a sort of benign authoritarian country run by a king. So you look at China, which is where Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, has just gone cap in hand to try and get some trade agreements, and China has lifted so many people out of poverty.
Yeah.
And, you know, more successful countries in sub-Saharan Africa, whatever issues around water, issues around desalination, so many things have happened that are good in the world, and that's what we need to harness.
And you mentioned Morocco, and that's because of their successful transition to renewables. That's why it's in your...
Yeah, I mean, again, if you look at the league tables, you go for Sweden or something in terms of the amount of renewables it's got, but, you know, that's too predictable. So Morocco, before the financial crash, 2007 and 8, it was more than 90%, I think the figure was about 95%, dependent on fossil fuel imports, oil and gas from unpredictable neighbours, such as Libya and Algeria, with whom its relations have been not good much of the time, and from other countries as well. The king and the price of oil during the crash peaks at $150 a barrel. The king turns around and says, look, guys, this is crazy. We've got so much sun and we have so much wind on the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts. We've got to do something about this. And within 6 months, they had developed a strategy. They build, which I visited, one of the biggest solar farms in the world, just outside a city called Ouarzazate, which is about an hour and a half's drive from Marrakesh. Amazing place, and many others. They are either built and on stream, or about to come on stream, or they're about to build. And they have gone in that time from pretty much 0 to 52% renewable energy and growing. And they were one of very few countries, not just to meet their Paris goals, but actually to meet them more quickly than was the target. Whilst, you know, and this is a really interesting point for everyone. And my book isn't some sort of, oh, why can't we all be nice and lefty? I challenge the liberal left in a number of areas. One of them is healthcare in Taiwan, if we've got time to talk about that. But it's also about the way we talk about and the way we think about climate and climate change. If it is thought about in either a sort of liberal metropolitan mindset or a mindset of sacrifice, you know, we must stop doing that, we must stop doing that, then it's lost. If it's thought of in the mindset of human development and economic growth, which is particularly appropriate for developing economies, then you're onto a winner, because you have a win-win. People don't see it as, you know, as they do here in Germany, whatever, as, oh, I can't drive my car anymore, you're forcing me out of my car, or you're forcing, you know, I'm not allowed to fly anymore, all these sorts of things. It's seen as an exhortation to denial. Actually, if you say to people, it is a route to growth, which it even is in developed countries. I mean, the amount of money to be made from green technologies, rather than just thinking the Chinese are going to do it for us, actually doing it ourselves. And so that's what's happened in Morocco. I think it's an amazing story.
You just mentioned Taiwan very briefly, because I do want to pick up on something that you said earlier, but Taiwan and Japan on the issues of health, but also social care. Let's take Taiwan. I think we've got some pictures, haven't we?
Yeah, got some pictures here.
Found, but just talk us through that, because health is incredibly expensive for many countries that are giving either a national healthcare, for example, the UK, and you mentioned Spain, or even ones where we're paying into, for example, here in Germany. But how is Taiwan getting it right?
So the European average, depends which country and which system, is somewhere between 11, 12, 13% of GDP goes into health. The United States, a country you would not hardly think of as the beacon of health service, where so many people don't have access to non-emergency healthcare, or at least not reliable, it's 19%. Taiwan, it was 6% and going up to 8%. And again, it's not perfect. There are things wrong with it. But what Taiwan has decided to do, so the short thing, Taiwan becomes an independent country, is a dictatorship for a long time with complicated set of social insurance, and a new democratic government goes system shopping around the world, takes a bit of the German system, a bit of the Japanese system, a bit of other systems, looks at the British NHS, by the way, and says, no thanks, we don't want that. And it creates a system that is a mix of tax, insurance, and what's called co-payments, which means you turn up, and unless you're very poor, you have to pay a bit, but it's not very much. It's about $2 or $3 a pop every time you go to the doctor. You don't have to go to a general practitioner, a general doctor to begin
get the
with.
referral, you mean?
You can go straight to a sort of clinic on your high street, a sort of glorified pharmacy, but more, or you can go straight to the hospital. And, you know, I saw people do this. They turn up at the reception and they say, oh, my leg's hurting, or I'm feeling depressed today, or I've got heart palpitations. They're immediately sent here, there, or everywhere. And they're guaranteed to be triaged, to be seen by a first person within 20 minutes, rather than sitting in a trolley in a corridor for a long time. And one of the reasons it's like this is because it's heavily digitized. So everybody has got their digital health card. As soon as you turn up at the reception, you give that, immediately comes up on the screen, and it goes upstairs and this place and that place. The doctor already knows everything about you by the time you've arrived. There's also a much stronger emphasis on health literacy, of people understanding much more about themselves and their bodies and their own genetics and how they are and what they need to do as well. So there's much more of a sense of preventative medicine than we have as well. Yeah. And so, as I say, it's not just a matter of throwing money at a problem. It's also about the efficiency of a system.
I actually have one question about Taiwan. I read somewhere that in Taiwan, actually, the government is the only buyer of any products from pharmaceutical company. Yeah. So their cost of medicine is actually way lower than in other countries. Then maybe that's a point that we have to think about. Healthcare system is actually something that we shouldn't think about profit, but it's something that it's not to make money of.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because they do embrace the private sector. You're absolutely right on that. And so the two reasons the American system is so expensive, one is the pharmaceutical companies are ripping them off the whole time. And the other one is just it's incredibly bureaucratic and inefficient. Neither of those things work. But in Taiwan, the government is, as you say, the purchaser of pharmaceuticals, but it's also the provider of health, the issuer of health service. But the providers are almost all private sector companies. And they're allowed to make a profit, but it's a very limited profit. But they operate as companies, and they compete with each other for your service. And so a particular hospital will go with that company or that company. But the amount they're allowed to charge the hospital, and therefore the amount that the hospital is allowed to charge you, and the amount the hospital is allowed to charge the government, is all very, very carefully regulated. And it changes all the time.
If you are just joining us or wondering what we're talking about, this is News Desk, and we are discussing this issue, ideas that work when politics feels broken. And with us, we have John Kampfner. He is an author and a journalist, and he has a new book coming out, which I think we can probably show you now. And it is called Braver New World, The Countries Daring to Do Things Others Won't. And we've just been talking about some of them, or some of the successes they're having in various areas, whether it's migration, whether it's health, social care, renewable energy. One of the things, John, that you mentioned nearer the beginning of our conversation was about the importance of courage. And this is one of the main themes of your book. And you were talking about how politicians need to be courageous, not bombastic. So you're not saying they have to be like a Donald Trump at all, but they have to be courageous. What exactly do you mean by that? How can you be courageous in this day and age when a lot of the population seems to be against you?
And it's not just politicians, or at least it's not just politicians at a national level. Two of the examples I cite are cities rather than national government. So it can happen at any level as well. It is a combination of lots of things. It is knowing what you want. There's no point in taking power nationally, regionally, of a local village or a local city if you don't know what it is you want to do. And amazingly, so many politicians expend so much energy getting elected. When they get there, they scratch their heads and think, now what do I do? So that's the first point. You've got to have a sense of what it is you want to do. You need to have a sense of personal and moral courage to believe in what it is that you want to do, which doesn't mean you have to be dogmatic. There may be some things that you just realise are not going to work, either because you hadn't reckoned on something or because the circumstances have changed. It is perfectly permissible, admissible to change a course of direction if the circumstances are that. But fundamentally, you need to know that certain decisions are not going to be immediately popular, and you are never going to carry the whole population with you. I mean, that's for the birds. There is nobody. You go to any cafe, any pub, any social gathering, you're never going to have a situation where, apart from in North Korea or something, if you're forced to, in which everybody agrees with you. So it is good that there is dissent. It's good that people disagree with you. And as a leader, you should listen. And you might be persuaded to change this here or there because of an amazing argument. But fundamentally, you need to know what it is you want. Now, alongside that, you need to be long-termist. You need to plan for some of the big changes of your time. And you need to be a good communicator as well.
Yeah.
Now, communication is not the starter, but it's the end point, because you can't communicate if you don't know what you're doing. But if you do know what you're doing, you need to be able to eyeball. I need to be able to say to you, a citizen, and I've met politicians, I end up in the Romanian city of Timișoara, which is where the revolution happened in 1989. It's got this amazing mayor. And the political situation is quite precarious, but he goes walkabouts the whole time. And people are berating him about this and that. And he just talks to them and says, look, I'm doing this for the following reason. For this, it costs this. What would you have me do instead? Don't just tell me I'm rubbish. Fine, you said it. Now, what is it you would like to do? You really take people on. You do so politely, but you take people on a big scale and on a small scale. And you also accept the fact that people are not going to agree with you, but that shouldn't derail you.
Just a really brief point that I want to make, which is I find it fascinating what you're saying, but isn't that precisely the issue that a lot of governments are having, particularly here in Europe, when it comes to sticking with what, say, was in their election campaign? Because they often end up in these quite weak coalition governments, which we're seeing in several countries. Yeah. So then they have to either completely ditch what they plan to do or water them down or fight through and try to get something. So then what happens is you end up in this situation where a lot of these promises are either lost and then they lose their electorate, and then there's sort of the knock-on effect is quite profound, because then their voters don't believe in their politicians, they don't believe that what they were saying in the campaign is actually going to happen, and then they end up going to the extremes.
But you see, this is where I mean, it's a really good point, and which is what makes me so cross about governments that are parliamentarily strong, like the UK, and still don't have the courage. So it's harder when you're in a coalition. But in any mature democracy, everybody voting in Germany, because if you're referring to Germany as the obvious example in this, everybody voting in Germany knows that they're voting for Party A or Party B, but whether they get in or Party C gets in, there will be a coalition, because the German constitution requires there to be coalitions. So it defies logic to be angry or frustrated with the fact that your party doesn't get everything through, and that's about, again, it's about the maturity of the discussion. And courage, as I say, isn't just about politicians. It's about community leaders, it's about business, it's about thought leaders. And social media obviously has a lot to play in all of this, because it is accentuating the shrill and the extreme instead of the calm, rational, which is to say, guys, we've got a coalition system, let's produce the best outcome on the system we've got.
But is it easier to be a country that's not a liberal democracy? I mean, you mentioned Morocco.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And we talked about Singapore.
You also talk about China,
Yeah.
who lives
And
poverty.
I had really interesting conversations with my editor about this when I was doing the sort of final edits on the book, about choosing my language carefully. And I say, no, absolutely. I believe very strongly it's not a Western thing at all. It's absolutely not a Western thing. In every continent, you've got democracies, you've got authoritarian states. And the model, the preferential model, is always for a viable democracy in which different points of view are entertained, in which a political system is created, in which that embraces that, whilst at the same time keeps out the absolute fringes. And so you don't have the sort of tyranny of the minority over the majority. You've got a good, healthy mix. It is obviously preferable, but we have to build into liberal democracy that sense of strength, of confidence, and of long-termism. Because Xi Jinping in China can say, this is our 10, 20-year plan.
Because he'll be in charge.
He'll be in charge. And it's just going to happen.
And no one is going to oppose his plans.
No one's going to oppose his thing. Now, I'm not advocating for that. What I'm saying is, if liberal democracy wants to survive, or democracy in any form wants to survive, it's got to toughen up, and it's got to become stronger, because if it doesn't, the other side will win.
John, it's been such a fascinating conversation. I think we've still got much more that we could discuss, but I have one last question for you, which kind of just to tie it all together. Are you hopeful for the future of the world and what it's going to look like?
I think
You said that you were a natural pessimist, and this was your chance to be optimistic and do some research. So do you now feel more optimistic?
Yes, because I see amazing people. Often it goes unreported, because good news tends not to be reported nearly as much, doing amazing things. But the headwinds are enormous. The threats and the challenges, not just from crazies like Donald Trump, but also from climate, demography, all these huge societal challenges are huge. So what we are facing is massive. So think of a rickety small boat in a very, very choppy water. That's where we are. But I am more confident than I started out that there are some brave people trying to do stuff.
Great, thank you.
We've definitely got a few comments before we
Yes,
go.
you
Just
might-
want to
you
get
must
them,
say-
just squeeze a few comments out, because I think they're quite interesting. One here from Vivek Kumar, who says, going forward, we all need pragmatism. That's one. We've got another one here who's quite a bit of criticism, saying, praising totalitarian China and monarchical Morocco in the same breath as criticising the world's largest democracy. That's the definition of hypocrisy.
I didn't do any of those things, but there we are.
This is from one of our
Everybody's
our
entitled
viewers,
to their views.
Nile, and then it's a question, but I think we can probably all just think about this. Do you guys? This is from Yaxil Rodriguez Colon. Do you guys think a world government is necessary because national sovereignty is already causing serious problems?
It won't happen. Good question, though.
Yeah.
Cherry, the poll. You started with a poll.
Yeah, I closed the poll, and I think the results are not so surprising to me. But so anyway, I will repeat the question. What dominates politics too much right now? So 48% of our viewers think leaders and theatrics. 32% thinks culture wars. 11% said quick fixes, and 9% says crisis management.
Yeah.
So
quite an interesting result there. Thank you very much. Just to say to everyone that this is actually our last news desk. It's quite a moment for us.
Indeed.
And just like to say a big thank you to everybody who's been with us on this journey, especially to some of our regulars.
Actually, Carolina was just saying in the chat that let's chat more next week the same time.
Yeah,
Sorry to tell you that
Unfortunately not.
Yeah, we
Back
will not
next
do
week.
that. And apart from Carolina, I also want to thank Davos, Nile, who are always here in the chat, and I had a really good time with you in this chat.
Yeah, and it's been a blast,
But of course, you can always watch us here on DW. There's plenty.
and we're working
to come.
on new formats. That's what I was going to
Absolutely.
say for YouTube. So do watch this space. We will be
So
back.
big thanks from
probably,
all the team here.
Yeah, and a massive
Berlin.
thank you to you, John, for being with
Very
us.
interesting.
A really
I
good
feel privileged to
last
have been
news
part
desk.
of your...
Looking forward to that
positive.
talk.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good luck
and
with
we
the
will
next
see you
set.
all soon. Thank you very much for being with us. Goodbye.
Thank you.